this series called Perspectives, and we're looking at our point of view in life changes everything, or our point of view in life makes us make certain decisions. And so the first week we said our perspective as people of faith is that we're sojourners. We're just passing through, and how we live life differently because we know we're just passing through. Our priorities change. Then 2 weeks ago, we talked about God's perspective with us as he wants to have a love affair with us. It's a love relationship, not a ritual, but it's a real relationship. And so we asked that question 2 weeks ago when we lay our heads down on our pillow at night. How did I do at loving today? Because that's God's call. To love him is to love our neighbor. And then last week we talked, maybe one of the most practical messages I'll ever give was seeing conflict differently. And we talked about conflict management. And as it would be, I had a conflict this week with a gentleman who is a great, great man. He's not here. He doesn't go here, but he's a great man. So sometimes conflict, we like evil versus good, but these were just two men disagreeing. And so I had to go through my list, reflect on it, because if I would have reacted at that point, it would have been ugly. So I reflected, and now I'm scheduling a meeting, and we're going to have a meeting. So, no, I just wish I wouldn't have preached on it last week, because it probably wouldn't have happened. So I want to jump into this week's perspective message. But before that, I need you to stand up and talk to someone, say hi to someone around you. Introduce yourself maybe to someone you don't know. By the way, we're doing communion today, too, at the end, so this whole message is leading to us receiving communion together. I'm going to jump into this. I only have one story today, but here's our takeaway. I'm going to give you the takeaway right away. And the takeaway today is this, that you have been chosen. If you're watching this, you're here, you have been chosen. 2, you have been broken, because life does that. But you have been blessed, and then you've been given to be a blessing to others. Let me say that again. You've been chosen, you've been broken, you've been blessed, and then you've been given to be a blessing to others. And today, I want to talk about an Old Testament character who was chosen, broken, blessed, and given to be a blessing to a very, very desperate nation. He didn't trust God perfectly. He had his doubts. He had his fears. He had an identity crisis. Anybody here ever have an identity crisis? That was part of his brokenness, but he eventually said yes to God, and one of the strangest, wildest miracles in the Bible happened. Strangest, wildest miracles. I've been called a strange, wild miracle. This is a strange, wild miracle. The man I want to talk about today in his journey, his name, Gideon. The story of Gideon reads like an action movie, and Gideon plays the role of an unlikely hero who, against all odds, accomplishes the seemingly impossible. I love this story. No one had great expectations about Gideon. Nobody. It was like Tom Brady. He was drafted 6th round, 199th pick. He is now arguably considered the greatest quarterback ever, and they picked 198 guys before him. Well, this is Gideon. He's not on the radar map. Nobody's really expecting Gideon to do something great. Nobody could see the greatness in Gideon, but the biggest problem was Gideon couldn't see the greatness in himself. As we open up in Judges 6, and in fact, Judges chapter 6 and 7 is what I'm going to cover today. I encourage you to go home and read, because you'll even get into more detail. But as we open Judges 6, we find the nation of Israel coming off a time of relative ease. The bills are paid, the kids are behaving, stock market is up, interest rates and inflation are down. Everybody at this moment is living high on the hog. You ever wonder where the term high on the hog came from? Well, I'm glad you asked. The best cuts of meat on a pig come from the back and upper leg, like the pork chops and the baby back ribs. The wealthy ate cuts from the high on the hog, while the poor ate belly pork and pig's feet. All right, we're done. Aren't you glad you came to church? That was your great information. Okay, they're living high on the hog, and as tends to happen to all of us in such times, when things are going really, really well, Israel forgets God. How many times did this happen? Israel forgets God. Judges records the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. For 7 years, he gave them into the hands of the Midianites. Midian was so oppressive, the Israelites hid in mountain caves. Whenever the Israelites planted their crops, the Midianites invaded the country. They were like swarms of locusts. It was impossible to count them or their camels. This went on for 7 years. And then finally, Israel cries out. Midian was so impoverished, the Israelites that they cried out to the Lord for help. Why did they wait so long to cry out to the Lord for help? It's because what we do, right? We try every other possibility and try to solve it all other ways, and finally we have to cry uncle and say, God, I need your help. I have a friend who's involved in men's recovery, and he says when a gentleman comes in, his question is, are you done yet? Meaning, are you done trying to try all the other ways to solve your problems? And he says they are done. When he says they are done, then he goes, good things are going to happen. Well, at the end of 7 years, Israel is done, and they cry out to the Lord. They cry out to the Lord to rescue them. So God comes to a man from a chosen nation that has been broken, and he wants to bless this man, this humble, unknown man named Gideon, and give him back to be a blessing to the nation. This is how God works. The angel of the Lord came and sat down under an oak where his son Gideon was threshing wheat in a winepress to keep it from the Midianites. When the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." "Pardon me, my Lord," Gideon replied, "but if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? Where are all his wonders that our ancestors told us about when they said, 'Did not the Lord bring us out of Egypt?' But now the Lord has abandoned us and given us into the hand of Midian." I would like to declare that Gideon is a Debbie Downer at this moment. But we've all been there, right? We've all been there. We hear in church, the Lord is with you. He'll never forsake you. And then you look around at your circumstances and say, well, I'm not sure I believe that. I'd like to believe that. But I've read about his past wonders. Where is he now? Like Gideon, it's easy to get to a place where we can be Debbie Downers. Gideon is threshing wheat in a wine press to keep it from the Midianites. Normally, you'd thresh wheat out in the open so the wind would blow away the chaff. But Gideon is hiding in an underground wine press, hoping to avert the attention of the Midianites. It's not a good situation. Gideon is frustrated. He's confused. He's wondering if God is really there. He's heard of victories from the past, but he sees no victories around him. And if you've ever wondered if God has a sense of humor, the angel of the Lord tells Gideon, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." Was God mocking? Was he sarcastic? Or did he see more about Gideon than Gideon saw about himself? Mighty warrior, he calls him. It was hard for Gideon to believe what the angel was saying. He's living in a spiritually broken nation. His family is worshiping idols. He's hiding in a wine press. So Gideon describes himself. He says, "My clan is the weakest of all the clans in Manasseh, and I'm the least of my family." Mighty warrior? Don't think so. Here's one of the most important parts of our journey, friends. This is important for all of us, and that is to realize who we really are. Gideon had no idea who he was. Today, I want you to know that God declares who and what we are, not by our brokenness of our past or our present circumstances. God sees beyond our faults, failures, and frailties. God reminds Gideon about what his name means. Gideon means mighty warrior. That's what his name actually means. And Gideon either didn't know it or he had forgotten. So I want to remind you today, all of us, God over in Scripture reminds us over and over in Scripture who we are. So let me take you through. You are his child. You are a friend of God. You are the light of the world. You are made for a good purpose. Friends, you are justified by faith, forgiven, and no longer condemned. You are more than a conqueror. You are his workmanship, created for good works. You are a royal priest declaring good news like a shining star. You are blood-bought, spirit-filled, heaven-bound, fully equipped warrior with special armor designed to tear down strongholds of the enemy. You are chosen. You were a little slow on that one. Thank you. God says that is who you are over and over. Peter wrote, but you are chosen that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. Sometimes like Gideon, we need to be reminded and reassured of who we are. There was a polar bear cub who was struggling with his identity. Stay with me on this one, okay? He asked his polar bear dad, am I a polar bear like you, Dad? Am I a polar bear like you? And his dad said, yeah, you're a polar bear like me. Why do you ask, son? And the cub says, well, I'm just making sure because it's really cold out there. Sometimes coming to church is just about being reminded of who we really are because it's a cold world out there that we go back to. You see, Henry Nouwen said, spiritual identity means we are not what we do or what people say about us or what we have. Spiritual identity means we are the beloved daughters and sons of God. That is who we are. And when we have that perspective, it changes the way we see everything. Gideon is struggling with who he is, so he's having trouble believing what God is saying. But after being reminded of his name, mighty warrior, Gideon still questions God. He says, pardon me, my Lord, but how can I save Israel? How can I save Israel? Gideon's still doubtful. He doesn't have authority to call out the cavalry from his own tribe, let alone others. And God reminds him, the angel says, Gideon, I will bless you. You will strike Midian down, leaving none alive. Now, if this was a movie, at this point, ominous music would start playing. Dun, 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 because the Mennonites are getting ready to make their annual raid. But instead of hiding in a wine press, Gideon is starting to believe enough that he decides to go for it. And he blows the ram's horn. And 32,000 men show up to fight. It's amazing. This is spectacular. This is how it should go. He takes a chance, believes God, blows the trumpet, and 32,000 men show up. But even after 32,000 men show up to fight, Gideon still struggles with doubts. He is so human, isn't he? He knows that God has promised to bless Israel through him, but he's looking in the mirror, and the reflection he sees doesn't look encouraging. Am I really chosen? Am I really a mighty warrior? 32,000 have shown up and he's still doubting. So he turns into Monty Hall and he says, God, let's make a deal. And God says, fine, what do you want? And he says, well, if you were to deliver Israel by my hand, as you said, I will put a fleece of wool here on the threshing floor. If dew is only on the fleece and the ground is dry, I will know that you will deliver Israel by my strength. He makes a deal with God. Gideon makes a deal. He wants a confirming sign, and the next morning, God says he's willing to play. The fleece is wet, the ground is dry, and then this doubting Thomas of the Old Testament reverses the test. He actually says, don't be angry with me, God, but let me make just one more request. This time, make the fleece dry and let the ground be covered with dew. And God graciously, patiently confirms his plan with Gideon, and he does it. I love this story. It's so human. It's so me. God calls him mighty warrior. He doubts. You'll save Israel. Gideon doubts. He blows a horn. 32,000 men show up. He doubts. Fleece is wet. He doubts. Fleece is dry. God says, I'll just be patient. When are you going to be done? I love what David writes. The Lord is merciful and compassionate, slow to anger, filled with unfailing love. Let's do a raise of hands here. Aren't you glad God is patient? Yeah, I was thinking, I'm glad God has been patient, but no, I'm glad God is patient with me today. Gideon's now. He's tried everything, and he's ready to try. This is where the story even gets better. Now, Gideon's at a spot where he's ready to shout, "Let's get ready to rumble." He's always wanted to say that. But God says, oh, not yet. Not yet? Did I tell you this is one of the strangest and wildest miracles in the Bible? Here we go. I got to write some numbers down. The Mennonites have 135,000 men. The Israelites have 32,000 men. Okay, it was cool 32,000 showed up, but there's still some challenges here because this is a 1-to-4 ratio. 4 Mennonite soldiers to 1 Israel soldier. And this is what God says to Gideon. He says, you've got too many people for me to hand the Mennonites over to you, or else Israel might brag, I did it myself. What? 1-to-4, we have too many people. So God instructs Gideon to tell anyone who trembles with fear may turn back and leave. And a bunch of dudes says, I didn't really want to do this in the first place. I got a tea time. There's a game on TV. I think I'll bow out. And 22,000 men walk away, leaving 10,000. Now the ratio is 1 to 13.5. You don't want to be the 0.5 person, but you know what I'm saying. So Gideon asks, now can I say, let's get ready to rumble? And God says, not yet, not yet, not yet. Still too many, God says. So God tells Gideon to take his men down to the water and let them drink. Get rid of any men who stick their face down in the water to drink. Keep the ones who ladle the water to their mouths with their hands. And when Gideon counts, 9,700 are disqualified, leaving 300 men to fight 135,000 men. By the way, that's a 1 to 450 ratio. 100 to 450. Gideon must have thought, you know what? I'm not ready to rumble right now. What did I get myself into? Gideon's like, this is a joke. So let's just do a review here. Mighty warrior, you'll deliver your nation from the Midianites' hands. He blows the ram's horn. 32,000 men show up. He tests God twice. God comes through, and then God takes 32,000 men and cuts them down to 300 men. Gideon is going to war with 300 men who know how to drink politely. I'm not sure that's who you want to go to war with. Jesus said, what is impossible with men is possible with God. Easy to read, easy to preach, hard to believe sometimes. Oh, one more thing. The Midianites were known for their superior weaponry. Swords, daggers, spears, javelins, iron chariots. Judges 5 records that not a shield or a spear was seen among 40,000 in Israel. The Israelites are outnumbered and they're outgunned. And then God says, one more thing before you go to battle. Your army of 300 can't take any of those weapons with you. All they can take is 3 things: a trumpet, a torch, and a clay jar. They are to meet and fight the 135,000 Midianites with a trumpet, a torch, and a clay jar. My thoughts are not your thoughts, Isaiah says. Neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. And Gideon thinks that's the understatement of the year. So God continues. He says, this is what I need you to do. I need you to surround the camp of the Mennonites, hide the torch in the clay jar, and when I say, blow the trumpet, blow it, and when you blow the trumpet, break the clay jar, and the light will shine out. Imagine Gideon telling these 300 men this. These 300 men are going, well, we're dead. It's been a good life, but this is it. I should have left when I had the chance. I should have slurped instead of, So this is what happens. They surround the camp. They blow the trumpets. I got to do it again. They blow the trumpets. They break the clay jars. And the Midianites see the glow of the lights, and they get confused, and it scares them off. and they begin attacking each other. And it says, when the 300 trumpets sounded and the jars were broken, the Lord caused the men throughout the camp to turn on each other with their swords. And when it's over, the Midianites had killed one another. It's over. The mighty warrior and his little army won with trumpets, torches, and broken pots. I love this story, and I've led you all to this place right here. God chooses broken things to bless and give light to the world. Tony Evans says brokenness is often the road to breakthrough, so be encouraged. It's a divine principle if you think about it. When Jesus fed the 5,000, it says he chose the bread, he broke it, he blessed it, and then he gave it as nourishment. David writes, a broken and contrite heart, O God, you will not ignore. Gideon, I want 300 of you to go out against 135,000. Surround the camp, bring a trumpet, a torch, a clay pot, hide the torch in the pot. And when I say go, blow the trumpets, break the pots, and the light will shine out. And then what did God say earlier? And I will bless you, and you will strike Midian down, leaving none alive. And my only question today is, what would have happened if the pots hadn't been broken? There would have been no victory, because when the pots were broken, the light shone out. When yours and my lives are broken before the Lord, the light is able to shine out of our lives. The woman who brought the box of perfume to anoint Jesus' feet, she broke it and then poured the perfume on his feet and anointed him, and the fragrance filled the room. There was no fragrance until the box was broken. And there was no light to confuse the enemy without the clay pots being broken. So let me say this again about chosen, broken, blessed, and given. You, I don't mean to point, but I mean it in a good way. You have been chosen. From the beginning of time, you've been chosen. It's not a contest. You weren't chosen. You were chosen for your uniqueness. You were chosen because the world needs you. You were chosen out of God's love. You have been chosen, but you must believe it and live in it, because you've also been broken, and so have I. Every one of us experiences brokenness, a broken friendship, a broken dream, a broken addiction, a broken family, a broken covenant. And sometimes we believe our broken lives deem us useless, and we work hard to hide our brokenness. But our brokenness, just like our chosenness, is a vital part of who we are. Brennan Manning says, you and I will never meet God in revival until we first meet him in brokenness. But you've been blessed. You've been blessed with your intelligence, your passion, your space and time. You've been blessed by God's grace to live in the fullness of life. And you've been blessed to do this together in community as we get to do. And ultimately, you have been given. You've been chosen, broken, blessed, so that you could be able to give hope and light and healing to this broken world. Amen? So I want to end with a story here before we hand out communion. This is a story probably many of you have heard before, but it's an anchor story around here, story that just fits. And it's something, it's a story we have to just share at least once a year. There was a man who had 2 large pots he used to carry water from the stream back to his house along a narrow path. Each hung on one end of the pole he carried across his shoulders. One of the pots was perfectly made and never leaked, but the other pot had a crack in it. By the time the man would get back from the stream, back to the house, the cracked pot would have leaked half its water onto the ground. I'm ashamed of myself, the pot said. Ashamed of what? The man said. Because of this crack, half my water leaks out on the way back to the house. I'm ashamed that I haven't been able to serve you well. And the man looked kindly at the cracked pot. He says, my dear old pot, you haven't failed me while we walk back to the house today. I want you to look at all the beautiful flowers along the path. Did you notice that the flowers were growing only on one side of the path? They grow only on the side where I carry you, but not on the other side. You see, I know about your crack, and so I planted flowers all along your side of the path. And while we're walking back from the stream, you're not losing water. You are making flowers grow. What you see as a flaw is the very thing that gives life to the flowers and brings beauty to this world. And that's why Paul said this. We have this treasure, Jesus, meaning Jesus, we have this treasure, this light in us in jars of clay, in clay jars, so that it may be made clear that this extraordinary power belongs to God and does not come from us. Gideon, I'm going to have 300 fight 135. You're only going to take a trumpet, a torch, and a clay pot. So that way, when the world sees this victory, they will realize the extraordinary power did not come from you, but it comes from God.